Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Spanner Man again here. Today we're going to make a video as basic as I possibly can for people that have got a small chainsaw like this one here. It's an MS180C, 31.5 cc's. Just got yourself a chainsaw and really don't know about chain maintenance and how to file it and also adjust your depth gauges. So first of all, it's got a 16-inch bar on it and has teeth left and right. On top of the chain, and we'll see if we can sort of get in there and have a bit of a look, you'll notice that what we refer to the cutting angle. And if we zoom in a little bit, just a little bit more, on that tooth there, you'll see a little line, and that's referred to as a witness mark. So this tooth was probably a couple of millimeters longer. It's worn down, and when we get worn down to that mark, as you can see, that's the end of the life of the tooth, and you end up with a little tiny triangle. But also that line will help you file, because that line is at 30 degrees. So when you file a tooth must be filed at 30 degrees. That's the left tooth and the right tooth. So you must hold the file parallel with that tiny little line. That's a guide for two purposes, as I said. One, to tell you that it's time to get rid of the chain, because as you've filed it down or ground it down, it's reached the end of the life, but it also helps you hold the file at that angle. So I hope that part explains a little bit to you. We have a tooth here, and maybe we'll briefly go over some of the geometry of the tooth, which will help you a lot. So here's a replica of a tooth. If we look on top of the tooth, this was the 30-degree angle that we're talking about, and this was a little mark. You'll notice that the tooth is also tapered. That's for clearance, as well as if we look at the side of the tooth, we've got a clearance on top that's got a taper. It's approximately about 10 degrees. The tooth is flash chromed for hardness. This part down here is called the gullet. You should try and make sure that when you file, you keep that fairly flat. You don't want humps and bumps. This part in front is called the depth gauge. It is normally set at from a brand new chain at 0.65 of a millimeter below the point of this tooth. So that little gap in there, because this is an enlarged version, would be 0.65 of a millimeter. So we have a little tool that we can measure that, and the tool is called a depth gauge, and there's your 0.65 of a millimeter, and there's some other markings on there. You can see your 30 degrees, so we've got 30 degrees to the left, 30 degrees to the right, 10 degrees. We won't go into what that's for, but that's for milling chains. And you've got 35 degrees, which is much more aggressive. This gauge is suitable for 1/4 inch, 3/8, 0.325 and 3/8 low profile, which is what this chain is. You place the gauge on top, and you look in this little window at the end to make sure that that depth gauge is not protruding out. And if it's not protruding out, then it doesn't need maintenance. And the maintenance is simple. It requires a little flat file like this, and it's just a matter of running that flat file over the top until it's filed off. This gauge is okay, but as this chain starts to wear down, there is another type of gauge, and it's called a progressive depth gauge. This is also made by Stihl, and it works a little bit different. You place it on top like that, and you can see the depth gauge there, and you run the file over the top until you remove any metal that protrudes out. This gauge will remove more than 0.65 of a millimeter as the tooth wears down. By the time you get down to that little mark at the back, it's probably going to take about a millimeter off. Why is that? Well, a guy called Ray Carlton in 1968 invented that particular type of gauge, and that is up to you whether you use this type of gauge from Stihl. They're only worth about $10, or you use this one. Personally, I'd buy both of them. They're only about $10 each, so it's not a lot of money. Then you've got the best of both worlds. Okay, So this is a 3/8 low profile chain. Make sure you use the right file. The right file for this is a circular 4mm file. So you need to hold this file at the correct angle, which is 30 degrees. Now, freehand filing, when you've got a full chisel chain, which is what this is, there's two types of chain, full chisel and semi-chisel. So before we file, we'll just have a look at both of those. Won't go into too much detail, but a semi-chisel chain has a radius on it. You can see this radius on here, and on the point you can see that nice little radius. A full chisel doesn't have a radius. It comes to a very sharp point. Why is that? This type of chain, or tooth I should say, is much more aggressive and will take more timber, but if that point gets blunt, the chain won't cut very well. So it's liable to get blunter much quicker than, say, a semi-chisel, and that's why most people probably use a semi-chisel. I prefer to use full chisel. I like to carry about 4 or 5 chains with me and just change them over. Now, filing position. Well, I guess you could say you can file in whatever position you want. I personally like to have my shoulder at the back of the saw, and I have my arms in front of me, and I can file left and right without really moving in a position. You'll also hear people turn around on YouTube. You'll find it in some of the forums. It will say, examine your chain, look for your worst tooth or damaged tooth, mark it and file them all the same length. Well, I'm here to tell you that you don't need to sharpen your teeth all the same length. The reason they're telling you that if you keep your maintenance up on the depth gauges, your chain will cut straight. If your teeth are all different sizes and you don't maintain the depth gauges, your chain will cut crooked. So therefore, the maintenance is that you sharpen the chain and you sharpen the depth gauges, or at least check them. You may not have to file the depth gauges every single time it needs sharpening, but you need to at least check them to make sure that they're okay, to also make sure that the chain is cutting correctly. So what I would do is that the chain's clean, it's been cleaned, you would mark it. Just mark it with a texter, so that's got a little yellow mark on it. You can have on a full chisel chain, which is this one, a standard low profile, this is low profile 3/8 chain, and this is full chisel, but as I said, semi-chisel, you will file as horizontal as possible. On a full chisel, you'll have a 10 degrees downward tilt. Why a 10 degrees downward tilt? It puts a compounded bevel on there. What that actually means is that it changes the profile that's more suitable for the full chisel chain. So I'll place this in here. I'll put this at my 30 degrees, so make sure that I'm sitting at 30 degrees. Drop it down a little bit for 10 degrees. Nice little strokes. And try and make sure that you keep the file as parallel as possible onto the next tooth. Onto the next tooth. Let's get the next one. Make sure also you use a good file. Don't use old files. You'll be there forever. A good file you'll get through fairly quickly. An old file, you'll be there forever. Now, you only generally need about 4 or 5 strokes. You'll get better and better at it. Okay, so let's just turn around and say that we've finished that chain. We need to do the other side. So we'll swap hands. Now you'll find out that you may be better at one. You might be better at left hand than right hand, or vice versa. So you need to practice, but you will get better. As you can see, my right hand is a bit better, but left hand's still pretty good. Okay, so let's just say that we'll finish both sides, the left and the right. What we need to do now is feel and inspect that and make sure that this top edge and this side plate edge are razor sharp. It's like looking at a sharp knife. You can have Pretty good guess just by eyesight, but you can actually feel that. It's sharp, it's razor sharp. So if you're not happy with it, just do it again. Maybe just do another 2 passes with the file on each side, on the left side. Now, when we talk about the left and the right side of the tooth, the left side is the tooth that's furthest away from you, and the right side is the tooth closest to you. On some of the electric grinders that you use, they'll talk about left and right side. So, and that's also always viewed from the back of the saw, not the front of the saw. Always view the left from the back. Okay, so you've sharpened the tooth up, and they're all different sizes. Next, you bring out your depth gauge. So we'll just go out and use this one. So this one here, have a look. I can't see that tooth, that depth gauge, sorry, sticking above. So there's no need, there's nothing to file, but we need to check anyway. That one's okay. That one's okay. That one's okay. That's so, as you can see, you can do it pretty quick. So yeah, it doesn't take long to check. That's why they say that, you know, check it every 3-4 times you sharpen it. I always say check it every single time. Then you can be sure. So let's check with the progressive depth gauge. So if we put the progressive depth gauge on, I can actually see that. I've got a fairly good trained eye. But you can check with the file. No, it's fine. I knew it would be. Now, this depth gauge here, the progressive depth gauge, is given the same result as the other one. But as we start to file down a little bit more, you'll find out using the progressive depth gauge that you'll probably file more off the depth gauge. Now, the other thing that's very interesting, that when you use the progressive depth gauge, you'll also notice that that's at an angle. So it will file the depth gauge at that angle, whereas this constant depth gauge only allows you to file on top flat. So normally what you do after you've filed it, you'll try and just round the corner off a little bit. Look, that's as basic as what you can get. Now, as I said before, you'll read, or you can read, or you'll see some videos. And if you take a brand new chain, everything is even. The length of the right hand tooth is the same as the left hand tooth. This depth gauge is the same as that one, the one in front of it, the one behind it. Everything's fairly even. But as you file, and you're not a machine, you will find that some teeth require more filing than others. And once the chain is more than 50-60% of the way through, you may find out that some are a couple millimeters longer than each other. And that's why it's very important that you check your depth gauges, because your depth gauges control the amount of bite that the tooth takes out of the timber. So therefore, if your depth gauges are not set correct, your chain most likely will cut crooked, or won't even cut properly, or won't be 100% efficient in its cutting because you didn't set the depth correctly. So that's very important on every single chainsaw. So just to briefly give you the different sizes out there, sometimes you might see these little hand pruners have got these little micro chains on them. That's 1/4 inch pico. The next size up is 1/4 inch. The only difference between 1/4 inch pico and 1/4 inch is the height of the teeth. This is a 3/8 low profile chain. The only difference between low profile and standard 3/8 profile is not the links. The links are the same because that's the pitch. The difference is the height of the teeth and the length of the teeth. They're bigger. So you've got 1/4 inch, 3/8 low profile, 0.325, 3/8 standard, and 404. They're your 5 different sizes. This type of gauge is specific to the chain. It's 3/8P, as you can see, so it's 3/8 low profile. It's not suitable for any other size, whereas this type of gauge is suitable for 1/4 inch, 3/8, 325 and 3/8 low profile. So as I said before, I would think it's a good idea that you get both gauges, because once your teeth starting to wear down a little bit more than this, you really need to be using this gauge. But you can use this gauge from the very beginning. Anyway, look, I hope that helps. I don't want to sort of go over to any more. Just look after your chainsaw. Don't try and hit rocks. And make sure that when you do buy files, a lot of the times they sell 3 in a packet, and a lot of times you can buy the Swiss files, Velobe. They do sell them separate sometimes, but a lot of times you can get a dozen in a pack. You'll get them much cheaper. So look, thanks for watching. Give us any comments, or give us a tick on the thumbs up, I should say, and subscribe to the channel, and hopefully you can learn a lot more. So anyway, thanks for watching. Bye for now.